What's going on, everybody? Jared Sandler here with you as we review the 2020 season, look ahead to the offseason and 2021 and perhaps beyond. And the way I'm going to do it is we're going to do it either a position or a position group at a time. So right now, I want to discuss the starting pitchers from this past year and consider what the rotation might look like in 2021. So we'll break it up into a few groups. Let's start with the veterans. The guys who were supposed to make up the rotation when the year started, obviously, of course, minus Mike Minor, who's a free agent, and perhaps the Rangers would, investigate what the market is for Mike. But we'll get into the offseason here in a little bit. I would find that to be unlikely, but I guess it's a possibility. But we'll begin with Lance Lynn. Obviously, Lance was outstanding. He was the best player on the Rangers this year. And, he gave us excitement every fifth day. Unfortunately, Shane Bieber was outstanding, and so Lance, I hate to say, doesn't stand a chance to win the Cy Young, but he really doesn't. Also, obviously, his last outing of the year changed the numbers a little bit. But Lance was great, and I think really beyond just the numbers, what Lance brings to this organization and has brought is leadership in the sense of the example of his mentality and his competitiveness. And I don't know how much someone can learn from that, because I do think a part of it, it's you kind of have it or you don't. I'm sure there's some wiggle room, like, hey, I can work on finding that extra gear or that next level of, mental toughness, but he's got it. And, I do think there's something to be drawn from that. But I also think a part of it is just, it's something special that he has. I don't want to make it seem like anyone can have what he has. I think it's a unique skill set. Obviously, his ability to use multiple fastballs was and is a big key for him. He's under contract for one more year, but as I'm sure the Rangers have engaged in conversations with other teams to move Lance. Nothing came to pass at the deadline, but I imagine that conversations will start back up this offseason. And ultimately what the Rangers will need to weigh is the value of whatever return they can get versus the value of him being in the rotation and providing some stability and perhaps, being a leader and providing some guidance for the younger guys and the value that it's, tough to quantify in fulfilling that role. Lance, though, for this past year was outstanding and definitely a bright spot. Jordan Lyles had a rough year. He had a couple of nice starts towards the end, but with Jordan, his fastball just was torn up this year. And I think a part of that is probably because the quality of the pitch was not where he'd like it to be or what he'd like it to be. But the other part is that, I don't want to say he became predictable for, just predictability's sake, but, he put himself into some predictable situations because, whether it was having a tough time commanding the curveball and being able to throw it for a strike. The curveball was a good pitch for him. That was his best pitch this year, but sometimes wasn't able to throw it for a strike. Or just his inability to really hit his spots with his fastball. The four-seam fastball was hit pretty hard. He gave up 12 homers off the four-seam fastball all of last year in a full season. This year he gave up 9, just to kind of put that in perspective. But Jordan's under contract for one more year and, figures to be in the rotation next year. The Rangers do want to focus on some of the young pitchers, but you also need to have stability in your rotation because if you throw just a bunch of young guys out there and you're not quite sure what you're going to get from them, or if the rotation is loaded with those guys, maybe 4 out of 5, then, it's going to make life really difficult on the bullpen, especially a bullpen that, will have some young guys. And we'll discuss the bullpen in another episode. So Jordan Lyles will be a part of the rotation next year. I don't foresee him getting moved. Same with Kyle Gibson. Gibson's got 2 more years left. And I think with Gibby, what's interesting is that he's got really good stuff. And I think what the Rangers were imploring him to do is just, attack the zone. And if you don't have tip-top command on a given day or night, don't be afraid to just throw your stuff in the zone because you've got good stuff. Not everyone can do that. Not everyone has that ability. Let's take Adrian Sampson for, last year for the Rangers, 2019. Adrian had to live on the edges of the zone. His stuff was not good enough to ever miss in the middle of the zone. That makes your margin for error a lot smaller. Well, Gibby would nibble, and I don't think nibbling's a bad thing because nibbling in one sense is just not giving in. But he's got the stuff, especially his slider, to where he can play in the zone when the command's not there. And he got himself into trouble with walks this year. And so I think that's something they're going to, reinforce when next year rolls around is, hey, don't be afraid to live in the zone. If the command, if you're not hitting the corners, obviously we don't want you throwing middle, but don't be afraid to throw a pitch that doesn't touch the perimeter of the zone because you've got good stuff, whether it's the sink on his fastball or his slider. And again, he'll be in the rotation, 2 more years left on his deal. Corey Kluber, this is I'm getting asked about him a lot. Obviously, he only pitched 1 inning for the Rangers. It was a scoreless inning, but then had the shoulder injury. The Rangers are not going to pick up his option. At least the indications are that they will not at $19 million. And I don't know that anyone would willingly pay him $19 million when he's barely pitched the last 2 years and he's getting up there in age. Now, the Rangers have said they'd love to bring him back at a smaller figure. The only challenge there is that a lot of times when you do that with someone and it works out, it's because they got some allegiance or tied to your organization. You know what? Listen, I get that you're not picking up the $19 million. What are you thinking? You're 14. Okay, I'd love to come back at 14. Whatever it might be. Problem is, Corey really didn't have any sort of tie, history, allegiance, loyalty to the Rangers. Not to say his experience this year was a bad one, but a lot of it was broken up, because spring training and then the quarantine, and he was really only here for a month after that. So if Corey wants to win a World Series, this isn't the spot for him. So. My guess is Corey ends up elsewhere. I get the sense he'd like to compete for a World Series and wants to do it right now, doesn't have time to wait on a rebuild, and he's going to get those opportunities. There will be a team who's willing to give him the same money that the Rangers would, I'd imagine, to kind of take the chance that he can maintain health and be productive member of their rotation. All in all, we look at those 4 plus Mike Minor. Obviously, Mike didn't have the year he'd like. Corey pitched 1 inning. Jordan Lyles and Kyle Gibson didn't have the years that they would have liked. That's a big reason why the season ended up the way it did. We had so much excitement about the rotation going into the year, and it just never really came together. All right, now let's consider the young guys. Let's start with Colby Allard, a guy who found his way into the rotation and then out. Did a nice job once he went to the bullpen. I don't think that that's a permanent place for him. A few things really popped up with Colby. One, his numbers with runners on base were really, really poor. And, this was not, I don't think, a coincidence. I think it was something the Rangers were working on with him or talking to him about is, pitching from the stretch and making sure mechanically he has the same flow and rhythm from the stretch as he does from the windup. One of the things that Julio Rangel, the pitching coach, told me was that, when Colby pitches from the windup, the movement allows him to time everything up and be in sync. The stretch, he starts moving too fast for his body sometimes. With no one on base, just to give you a perspective, opposing hitters hit 147 against Colby. With runners on base, they hit 364, and with a ton of power. So, that was a challenge for him and something they're going to work on. He did show an ability to adjust and start mixing his pitches more. Really early in the year, he was fastball cutter and was kind of predictable in location. He started throwing the changeup more. He started throwing the curveball more. That curveball, I think it's going to be a big pitch for him. If he can rediscover the feel of that pitch, a pitch that, when he was in high school, a lot of people credited as possibly his best pitch. It's not one he really throws, but he's got to have that mix because he became really predictable with what he was doing. He did make that adjustment, but now, he's got to be better with runners on base. Now, remember with Colby, he's 23 years old. All right, he's still young. They're 23-year-olds who haven't sniffed the majors yet, and they go on to have nice careers. So he's young. It's some baptism by fire. I expect him to compete for a rotation spot. Again, if all 3 of those veterans are back, Lance Lynn being the biggest wild card of the 3, if they don't trade him, there's 2 spots for young guys. I do think Colby Allard would be a favorite for one of those 2 spots. Kyle Cody would probably be the other one. He earned that. He was really good this year. One of the things he talked about was working on his slider and tightening his slider up, but his slider was a really good pitch for him this year. Now, again, small sample. He threw just barely over 20 innings, but the slider was a really impressive pitch. How is he going to do when he starts seeing teams for a second, third, fourth time, hitters for a second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth time? that's going to be a key and something we couldn't possibly have found out this year. It's something that we'll have to wait and see until next year. But remember, this guy was the Rangers minor league pitcher of the year in 2017 and then missed 18 and 19 due to injury. So it's not like he totally came out of nowhere. He's got ability, did a really nice job with that fastball slider combo. It'll be interesting to see how he works the change in a little bit more next year. But I expect him to be a leading candidate to compete for a rotation spot. Guys who perhaps are on the outside looking in from an opening day rotation standpoint, Joe Palumbo. Unfortunately for Joe, this was somewhat of a lost year because of the ulcerative colitis and only making 2 appearances and only pitching 2 1/3 innings. With Joe, he's got to show that he can get righties out. The changeup has got to be a better pitch for him. Unfortunately, here in his big league career, he just hasn't missed bats in the way that, I think he'd like, at least enough. Now, he does have more than a strikeout per inning, but opposing hitters are also slugging over 660 against him. So maybe it's that he's missing bats, but he's not often enough missing the barrel. He has been good against lefties from an average standpoint, although lefties have hit for a ton of power. Both lefties and righties have an OPS of around 1,000 against him. He's got to, turn things around. Joe is 26 years old, so he's starting to get out of that young zone. And he'll have a chance to compete for a rotation spot, but I think just based on this year, he'll be on the outside looking in. Wes Benjamin, someone who put himself in the conversation. I don't even know that anyone expected Wes to be in the conversation. He had a really good year, pitched 22 innings, over 8 appearances. He ended up making 1 start, was also the headliner in a few outings. I think Wes is a guy who could have a really nice career as a number 5 starter or a long reliever at the big league level. The things I like about Wes is I think Wes knows who Wes is. He understands his skill set. Does he have the same margin of error as, a top of the rotation type pitcher? No, but he attacks the zone. He pitches with confidence. He locates his stuff really well. So he's working oftentimes around the perimeter of the zone, kind of what we were talking about with Kyle Gibson. Wes is kind of the guy who maybe needs to live more around the perimeter of the zone. Really like the left-on-left curveball. That was a good pitch for him, and this year lefties hit just 200. Righties had a little bit more success, so he's going to have to improve against righties if he wants to be a consistent starter, but I do think he's a guy that's got a big league future, and I think this is a big reason why. Will he compete for a rotation spot? Yes, he will. Obviously, we're assuming health with all these things, so I think, if there's an injury, which oftentimes there is, he'll be in a great spot. My guess is he's on the outside looking in for a rotation spot, but very well could be a part of the big league roster in some sort of a capacity, especially if the Rangers try and play it safe with some of their young pitchers and have a tandem situation, a piggyback situation. Wes could be a part of that. I think he could be a really good 3 to 4 inning guy. Brock Burke likely won't be ready for the start of the season after having shoulder surgery. And if so, they're not going to want to push it. He's a guy who could be in the rotation in a piggyback type of environment. They don't want to get the innings up. And same with Kyle Cody, because they're not going to give Kyle Cody 170 innings next year. So Brock Burke's a guy who could be a part of that as well. A lot of people are super excited about him prior to when the Rangers acquired him and prior to the injury. Hopefully he can come back and be a part of the mix next year, even if it's not right away. I imagine at some point we will see him. All right, so that takes us to the next group here. Taylor Hearn and Jonathan Hernandez, 2 relievers this year who have had starting history. Are they going to be considered starters? Jonathan, probably not. And Jonathan said as much. He likes being a reliever right now. 3 years down the road, 5 years down the road, maybe he re-explores it, and the Rangers do. But right now, I think he really likes his role, and I think he's kind of the next closer for this team. If the Rangers move Rafael Montero, then it might be Jonathan's gig, depending on how Jose Leclerc comes back from his injury. Either way, he's a high-leverage reliever, and I expect him to maintain that role for next year. Again, could that be, reinvestigated at a later point? Absolutely. But he's even said he likes his role right now in the bullpen. Taylor Hearn, on the other hand, has said that he'd like to, have another crack at being a starter. And I think the Rangers are open to that. I think he's going to go to spring training as a starter. They're going to stretch him out as a starter. And if he earns a role as a starter, he'll stay as a starter. If not, then, he'll go back to the bullpen. The key for Taylor is the changeup. He's got to refine that changeup so he can better attack right-handed hitters. This year, as a reliever, he actually ended up being more successful against righties and lefties. But either way, you talk to people, they're going to tell you that changeup's got to be better. The one thing, too, is Taylor walked 11 batters in 17 in the third innings, struck out 23, and opponents hit barely over 200 against him. He's got really good stuff. He fits in the category of attack, attack, attack. Be in the zone. Challenge people to hit your stuff because your stuff is really good. I think he knows that. The Rangers know that, and that's going to be a point of emphasis is, hey, let's cut down on the walks, because we cut down on the walks, all of a sudden, the numbers speak for themselves. Sub 650 OPS against. It's not like guys are figuring out Taylor, but the free base runners are going to be an issue as a starter. It's an issue no matter what, but that's going to really catch up to you. It's going to, cut into your pitch count, your ability to go, X amount of innings. So I'm excited to see what Taylor does this offseason. I'm really excited for him to grow perhaps back into a starter's role. As far as the offseason and what's out there, I wouldn't expect the Rangers to go out and be really active from a starting pitching standpoint in free agency. Maybe if they really feel like they can get Marcus Stroman or someone like him or Taijuan Walker at a great deal, that'd be tough to pass up value-wise with, whatever long-term benefits, maybe they'd consider that. But I really do think that, they want to use at least 2 spots in their rotation for some of these young guys to learn. You'd obviously love to learn that these guys are major league starters, but whether you learn that they are or they aren't, there's progress in that and gaining information. That's why, for Joe Palumbo, this is such a tough year. I don't know that the Rangers really learned a ton about Joe Palumbo. So you want to learn, and I think they want to make sure they've got spots in the rotation for that. In years past, maybe you'd sign a 1-year veteran who you expect to flip at the deadline if he pitches well, and if he doesn't, no harm, no foul, he's gone at the end of the year. The problem is those guys don't yield the same type of returns that they used to. Teams value prospects way more than ever before, and that's probably only heightened by the fact that a lot of teams are shedding payroll, so cheap labor is more valuable labor. So the turnaround, the exchange for these, expiring contract veterans, just it's not enough to justify filling a couple of spots in the rotation on those types of guys. Maybe the guys they have are in those conversations, but bringing new guys in, I wouldn't expect to see a whole lot of change from a starting rotation standpoint. So there you go. That's our review and preview of the starting rotation from 2020. Looking ahead to 2021, we'll be doing this for the bullpen. We'll be doing it for the various position player groups as well. So be on the lookout as we continue the Rangers conversation. And as always, you can always reach out to me at Jared Sandler. Until next time, stay safe, be healthy, and we'll talk to you soon.